I bought a stretch of land on the edge of town many years ago. It was dry, rocky, and not much to look at, yet I saw something in it that others ignored. The land stretched far enough to hold entire neighborhoods, yet it was tucked away behind hills that made it easy to forget. Everyone else laughed at me for buying it, yet I kept it close to my chest because I knew its true value. Years passed and I paid the taxes and kept the land quiet. While other developers rushed to build malls, offices, and fancy gated communities, I stayed patient. I knew the Homeowners Association in the next town had been trying to expand. They wanted more control, more fees, more power. They bullied their own residents into strict rules about paint colors, fences, and even what kind of grass was allowed. Sooner or later, they would run out of space and go hunting for more. One day, surveyors began walking the land next to mine. They moved closer every week. They drove stakes into the soil and brought trucks and bulldozers. I knew what they were doing before they even admitted it. The HOA wanted to expand a grand project of 96 homes complete with playgrounds and a clubhouse. They thought they owned the land, but in truth it belonged to me. At first I said nothing. I watched from a distance as they cleared brush and poured foundations. They built frame after frame. Workers arrived every morning while trucks dropped off lumber and cement. The HOA board bragged in local papers about their grand vision. They promised new buyers peace and security. Families signed contracts for homes that did not even exist yet. What they never knew was that I had set the trap years earlier. When I bought the land, I carefully filed every deed, every survey, and every right-of-way with the county. My documents were airtight. I also knew the HOA had a habit of skipping details. They trusted word of mouth and old maps. They assumed ownership without double-checking. It was arrogance mixed with greed. By the time the first row of houses stood tall, I made my move. I walked into the construction office one morning with a folder in my hand. The manager looked at me as if I were a stranger trespassing on his empire. I laid the papers on his desk and told him plainly, "This land is mine. You have built on my property without right or permission." He laughed until he saw the seals on the documents. His face drained of color. He called the HOA president, who rushed in with 2 other board members. They argued that the land was theirs by planned expansion. They claimed the city had approved it. I showed them signatures of county clerks from 10 years earlier proving that I held the deed. Still, they ignored me. They pressed on with construction. So I let them. Weeks later, the project reached full speed. Dozens of homes were nearly finished. New residents prepared to move in. Families dreamed of decorating bedrooms and planting gardens. The HOA celebrated with banners and speeches, yet none of them realized that every nail hammered into wood only deepened their problem. They were building wealth on soil they did not own. That was when I filed the lawsuit. My lawyer submitted claims of unlawful construction, trespassing, and theft of land use. The courthouse nearly erupted at the sight of my case. The judge set an emergency hearing. HOA board members walked in with fake confidence, but I had the facts. I explained to the court how I had purchased the land long ago, how I had maintained the taxes, and how the HOA had never once filed for a transfer. Their permits were meaningless because they built on soil outside their boundaries. The judge reviewed the deeds line by line. The seal, the dates, the records all matched in my favor. The HOA tried to stall. They begged for time. They even accused me of fraud, yet every claim fell apart. The judge finally ruled that all 96 homes stood on my property and therefore belonged to me. The courtroom fell silent. The HOA president nearly collapsed. Their dream community now legally rested in my hands. Families who had signed contracts for houses suddenly realized they had purchased nothing. Every promise made by the HOA had turned to dust. The best part was that I had never lifted a hammer nor spent a dime on construction. They had built me an entire neighborhood for free. What they thought was their empire had become my inheritance. Of course, I faced choices. I could evict everyone, sell the homes at market value, or lease the land back at rates that would crush the HOA. I decided to play smarter. I announced that I would honor the families who wanted to move in, but the HOA itself would be dismantled. No more petty rules about fences or mailboxes. No more power games about paint colors. The families cheered while the board members sulked. News spread quickly. Reporters filled the street. Cameras caught the moment I stood at the gate holding the deed high. The headline read, "Man outsmarts HOA and wins entire neighborhood." People called me a genius, yet the truth was simpler. I was patient while they were greedy. I paid attention while they rushed. I set a trap that only worked because of their arrogance. In the months that followed, I worked with city planners to rezone the area under my name. Buyers lined up for homes. Some families who had feared losing everything now thanked me for saving their dreams. I set fair contracts that favored residents, not an HOA board. Slowly, the neighborhood grew not as a prison of rules, but as a community of real owners. The former HOA president tried one last desperate move. He gathered lawyers to appeal. He argued that the ruling was unfair, that the land should revert to community interest. The appeal failed instantly. The higher court confirmed the original judgment. His reputation collapsed. He was forced to resign from every civic post he held. Standing on my porch overlooking rows of new homes, I realized something powerful. Wealth is not always about money in the bank. Sometimes wealth is knowledge, patience, and the ability to wait for others to trip over their own pride. The HOA built 96 homes on my land, but in the end, they built me a legacy. Even today, people drive by that neighborhood and point to the story. They tell newcomers how the mighty HOA fell into its own trap. They whisper about the man who never lifted a tool yet gained an entire subdivision. Some even call it poetic justice. I call it careful planning, because when you deal with bullies who think they own everything, the best revenge is not shouting or fighting. The best revenge is letting them dig their own hole and then watching them fall straight into it. And that is exactly what happened when the HOA built 96 homes on my land and discovered far too late that they had walked right into my trap.